Back to the bench? Maybe? Maybe for a bit. You're in the midst of the Grand Campaign. In recognition of the recent historic emergence of the worst monarch. A 3-3-3 with a 9-year life expectancy. Let's go ahead and start having a think about Euros. About boards, game, rules thereof, the systems. Maybe. We'll see how well this session holds up. I got the usual lungful of seasonal gunk. Work through that and have a think about rulers. How they are, what they do. What in practice these two tables, two, you could think of these modifiers as an extension of this table. What these barriers accomplish. And then in turn, this hell that is awaiting whoever decides to engage the Ottomans. Means it's time for spreadsheets. The definitive tool of think. The board will be there in the background for looking at. Let's see, I'll resize this a bit. Get it to like naturally fit the space we're working with. Down a little. Down a little more. Over the course of the refurbishing and the playthrough, I've constructed many such think sheets to briefly go about analyzing some aspect of the game. A fair portion of the big ref is pages that I use to do some quick analysis of odds of things. Such as they are in rules. So first of all, let's think about reign length. This number here, which is just kind of first order dishonest, because the your reign length expected off of this table is a cap asterisk on reign length, since you are making survival checks. Your true life expectancy is how many survival checks you survive. Capped at this plus up to 2 from having perfect survival check. So, first step for thinking about that, I'll go ahead and gotta reposition some windows so I can be viewing multiple things at once on the one monitor I continue to work with, somehow. So, survival. Let's have a think about survive. Pop that into a center. Alright, so our baseline. Neutral survival checks, where you're just rolling the die and have no modifiers. This is pretty easy to talk about. On any given turn, if your monarch is alive, it is just that 1% chance. On a 10 or better result, the monarch is dead. And on a natural 1, the monarch is especially healthy and will survive longer. So from any given point in time, you have a zero 0.9 of being alive, which I could further break down into a 0.8 of regular being alive, 0.1 of bonus lifespan, and 0.1 of being fucking dead. And then the process ends. But now, from that reference point of you are alive right now, what's your life expectancy, though? If we're just projecting forward, if you're trying to create a weighted sense of how long your true survival is for a monarch. Well, it's 0.9 to the power of how many turns are you trying to survive. Your odds of passing that many consecutive survival checks, which, you know, quickly picks up a lot of decimal places. So let's just go ahead and format those down into some cleaner numbers, get them good and truncated. And you can watch that decay. Probably get a nice lined graph drawn up of that. In a moment. For now, we'll just look at the curve in place there. So the bad, who landed on that, we have called it optimal result of 9-turn adult because you are at your full stats immediately and have your best base life expectancy. A life expectancy of 9 turns will only be lived through 38% of the time. Asterisk. Well, no. So on neutral die here, the death chance is static. Your chance of boosting your lifespan beyond the limit, where 12 would be the upper baseline for having been a baby. Yeah, so 38% is the best you get, is your chance of getting your entire lifespan out of a 9-turn monarch. More than 60% of the time, they will be dead before then, on neutral die. And our modifiers here, that can only get worse. All of the survival modifiers are positive. Unless there is an event that gives you negative survival modifier. Which I could just as well pop over and check on. Let's see, the economy, fools. Madness is survival +1. Sickness is survival +1. Yeah, let's see. Just look for survival in this section. Survival +2 for plotting at court. And now we've wandered off into the actual scripted historic events, which is getting ahead of ourselves. So for now, getting back to that monarch table. So how many of these could be stacked? You will not have fragile health and a dynastic crisis at the same time. So just poor health would have you at the +1. Dynastic crisis gives you that +2, then +1. Poor stability gives you that +1. I don't think we need to think about factoring in the economy events, since there are 50 economy events. Hop right back down there again. Up from politics. Yeah, there's 49 different economic events on a table with 100 cells. So the chance of any specific event hitting you any specific turn is pretty minuscule. I'd say it's not relevant to factor it into talking about some general probabilities. all fits within the arc of the orb. Where, actually, let's see, Hey, alert box, where are you on this? Not far enough up at all. You were hiding behind the maps. Go ahead and let that play again. Yeah, there you are. Good and earthy. Okay, let's think about the +1 case. Which, so yeah, the +1 case would be for any one of these bad things. You're otherwise fine but at low stability. You're otherwise fine but at poor health. Or you're on the cooldown from a... Well, Dynastic Crisis would deserve its own listing then, since that's an arc. Like, this is because you have poor health or poor stability as a persistent concern. This is when you have both. When for whatever reason, you have been put into the danger zone. Where this also is pretty simple. So we have 0.8. To the power of your turn count. Then all the way over here, 0.7 to the turn count. Slap the formatting on there, and hey, here we go. Here's some very tangible effects. So your unhealthy ruler, living for whatever span of time. So like an example there would be my current Sultan, Selim the Boneless, who has been living in poor health, but with long nominal life expectancy. Let me go look at that again. Yeah, Selim came in on turn 8 and will die on turn 14. Yeah, he was a 6-rounder. But a 6-rounder in poor health will die sooner 3/4 of the time. The power of exponents. Or if you are... So, one of the things that's kind of in play for this round of thinking... I don't need to shrink those columns. They can stay as wide as they are for now. Is so, supposing you have been left with bad. How long are you really stuck with bad? You're on your worst case scenario, 3/3/3 Monarch in good health. How long is he alive, and what can you reasonably do to try to leverage them off of the throne and into the trash bin where they belong? And so, for example, this we had previously our 9-turn bad will die sooner 60% of the time if you're otherwise keeping the country good and healthy. If you're willing to just tank your stability for a bit, those odds go way down. Now suddenly 87, 86% of the time, he will not make it to the finish line. You will get him dead some earlier point. Probably. Again, on any one turn, if you already have as a given they have lived this long, then your instantaneous in the moment probability of survival is staying constant. Do not succumb to the gambling. Probabilities don't owe you debts. But when you're weighing out how long you're waiting for, when you're trying to make yourself a cloud of a schedule of all possible times that things will end. Also, these projections aren't influenced by the natural one, get a boost in health. That boost in life expectancy is on the cap, not on the odds. The odds are always based on the current situation. So the fact that the bad who is in play did receive one of those doesn't change these numbers. That now, the fact that it's been a further turn, so we're now thinking about up to 8. Well, no, we're holding it up to 9 turns. A turn occurred in which they received a boost. The turn on which you get a boost, you are just kind of kicking the can down the road. You're not pulling yourself farther up the curve. The good health rule, at least as it's being referred to, is this guy down here, rule 8.2. If you roll a natural 1 on a survival check, you add 1 to your reign length, up to a maximum of 2 bonus turns of life expectancy for the Monarch. You push back the automatic death line, wherever that was. Doesn't change any of what's being considered here. So now let's think about a crisis ruler. How much does crisis impact your Monarch's ability to survive? Just try to read that orb. All those beeps are this side. Open calc will get concerned when I'm trying to paste onto things that already have data in them. It'll just give a quick warning beep. You sure about that? There's numbers in there. The economy. You 20 turn monarchs, no. Your maximum would be a 14 turn monarch. Since 12 is as high as your base life expectancy can be, then you could get 2 bonus turns. If you started with a baby and got 2 natural 1s at some point over the course of their life, then you would have your Methuselah there. Your 14 turn forever ruler. So, on the first cell here, supposing that you're in otherwise neutral good standing, which, yeah, poor health can't be involved if we're talking about a crisis. So if you're just otherwise stable, which, maybe you aren't though, since you did just get slapped with a crisis, so you also have that stability drop involved. We can consider both of those cases side by side. So let me just go ahead and extend that header. And I can go ahead and add some descriptors to this. So, first turn, you're at that -2 on the die. That +2 on the die, rather. So you're at 0.7. Second turn, you survived that 0.7. Then you're at +1. And then from here going forward, you are back to normal. So 90% chance of surviving. Which, okay, already visible there right away. Half the time, you will die of a crisis. Almost. A little better than half the time, a crisis will destroy your Monarch before you get out of the crisis penalties completely. Alright, but now what about when you're unstable? Now we're starting at that good 60%. If you're +2 off the crisis and you're +1 off of being off kilter and imbalanced. That becomes your 0.6 by 0.7 for the second turn, and then the rest propagates down. So yeah, if you're unstable and get slapped with a crisis, now, definitely, actually, half the time, your Monarch drops dead again. And you get to substitute them out. More than half the time, a crisis will put another body on the pile. As a baseline. This is how things go for everybody who's playing by the normal, the basic dynastic rules. Now, though, let's consider the real theory. The big data. How much does it hurt to have all of this and then also be running the late game Ottomans, where at the very end game, there's a +3 on survival that's just permanently fixed in place. Oh, and I've overlooked this one for a long time. Another +1 per period if anyone had 8 admin or higher. If you happen to pop a good Sultan, the rest of them are even more prone to die. Although, right, so up here, any Sultan that is good at military, 7 or better military means you are immune to these modifiers, and so is your successor. So you hope for good fighters, and that's the only thing that matters. Good fighters and non-nerds. A fighter may also be a nerd, but they must be a fighter first to provide that shield. Otherwise, you are in the hell spiral. That is the Dynastic Thunderdome. Where we have also, so the survival versus reign length. For now, let's just talk about survival, and then we'll think about other things later. So, period 1 and 2. Yeah, we're just thinking about survival checks at first. So, the neutral case is the same in periods 1, 2, and 4. In periods 3 and 5, the baseline becomes +1. And in period 6, the baseline becomes +2. Being the Sultan of the Ottomans is like having bonitis in the middle of a civil war on a good day. That is your normal as you close in on the later game. So for Ottoman stuff, which I guess, yeah, let me give myself another large header here. Let's take a look at how long a sultan can remain solid at room temperature before it sublimates into another dynastic crisis. So for our survival curves, we now need to think about the +3, +4, the +5 case, and then boosted crises, since crisis also becomes more common because of this. The moment you have that negative modifier on reign length, you actually can't get sickly rulers anymore. Fragile health goes away in exchange for more dynastic crisis. You can no longer have poor health, you can no longer be baby. You will get rapid succession of infighting adults. Which in its own way seems weird because part of the historical trend that produces this mechanic, that this mechanic is meant to be shouting out to, meant that a lot of Ottoman sultans took the throne as children and had their administrations piloted mostly by the rest of the court for a while. You in fact had many baby sultans who would be on the throne for so long as the faction backing them was strong, and then the moment the wind changes, that child goes in the bin and a fresh child gets on the chair. Instead, old men ruling the world. A new age. We gotta think about those. At least for the start of this is pretty simple, since we're just doing the flat, non-crisis, standard succession think about. So what we have here is we start here at 0.6, and we will see just how quickly this number vaporizes. Down to, no, you will not survive, very quickly. You're very lucky if you've made it 4 years. The revolving door sultanate, there it is. The joy of exponential curve. Yeah, +4 half the time. You're just dead. And halves quickly on their way to approaching 0. The odds are no. No. Nope. Do not. And in our very worst case, the you are already dead phase. Hold on. Stray number there. Yeah, even more so. Just completely vanishing from the number of significant figures we're using here. Completely impossible. So we had their crisis at +1. So now we got to think about the ascended levels of crisis. based on that +1, +2, and +3 going on. We aren't dealing with ordinary dynastic politics anymore. This is to go further beyond. So already Ascended Crisis, we are starting off at one worse than Standard Crisis, which is, so it's the equivalent of Crisis Unstable. Which, since I'm going ahead and talking about 3 levels of modifier, I may as well assume instability. In the case of being stable, you are a whole 1 rank to the left of where you would have been. Yeah, so let's start at that 0.5. Then 0.5, 0.6. And then 0.6 all the way down. The crisis spiral is real and strong. Yeah, so 6, 7. Recovering back to a baseline. Oh, this one should be even worse off, actually. I missed that. We're staying unstable post-crisis, then these are 80% rolls. There we go. Adjusted crisis. Yeah, throne is lava. Yes, that's being unstable when the +1 modifier to general survival is on. Half of the time, you just pop immediately. Right? Have I bent those the right way and it's still through the swamp fog, making sense? Yeah, because it's +2 and +1. Yeah, so our baseline crisis is 70 by 60, or rather 70 by 80, and then 90's the rest of the way down. Our slightly boosted crisis is then in turn 6, 7, 8. This one should be slightly better. This is 7s. Once we get back to normal. Look at that. Once the vibrating stops, you might keep walking, ever so briefly. And the 4, 5, 6 arc for Crisis 3. Where's he? So this is +1 unstable. And this is at +2 while unstable. And this is at big. legendary Super Crisis. It stands on its own. So at your flat, +3 on the initial roll, your +1 from being unstable, and your +2 from the fresh crisis. You're at a +6. And you are in hell. Nothing remains. Period 5 is a non-stop crisis spiral. A continuous backstabbing motion. The Ottoman Imperial harem is just completely filled with vipers. Upside, no one bad ruler can exist at all. Any bad that manifests here immediately vaporizes. And anyone with at least 7 military gets to escape the cycle of reincarnation that's happening here and return to the normal table, where they might have regular life expectancy for a while. But the way of things, when you're a sultan and all the modifiers are on, is you do not survive. I'm just kind of quickly sweep over this by hand. To do some highlighting. Something I'll usually do after I've built one of these graphs is I just go ahead and color code it a bit. To give a general sense of the shape of the data, the texture. Gonna have in pink here all of the less than 10% cells. And then kind of going like bands of 20s usually, sometimes 30s, sometimes quarters. Let's go with quarters. Now there's red. Take everything up to 50%. Into a nice orange. .75 gets to be light yellow. And then all the way up here, here's green. You can be reasonably confident that you will remain alive. Pretty firmly sure. Forecasts predict you exist. The state completely absent from the auto board. You can see at a glance here a bit of diminishing return from additional modifier emerging. The gulf between Ascended Crisis and the legendary Super Crisis from royalty. Less pronounced than the difference between everything is fine and things are generically not fine. So thinking about that +5. Can the +5 generic case actually happen, though? Right, because sickness ends up out of play. Unless when you have yourself a normal ruler, you're using the normal tables briefly in a strange island of stability. So when hell modifiers are active, yeah, you have at worst that +3 on survival. And at that same time, you have a -2 on your duration. Yeah, at the same time that these become available, these become enforced. You are no longer receiving sick rulers while you are in danger mode. You can only get a shift of 1 for the long term from being unstable. Or no, you can pick up that extra shift if you've had a good administrator who couldn't defend themselves. There's still a case where the +5 or more could emerge. Yeah, this is what you get instead of disease. You have the possibility of legalism, which goes beyond disease. In that it sticks for the rest of the period, because... you know, fill reasons. Too many laws and not enough sword fights. Alright, so that's the survival test, given a preliminary thought about. So let's move on here to reign length. So your monarch is dead. What happens now? Well, good news. It's time for succession. Where the succession table itself is remarkably smooth and ordinary. Just a flat, steady range from 3 to 12. With the 2 special cases, which then, pass on their result to a regular roll on the table for the rest of it. Yeah, the phrasing shows in here is weird, but I would take it that per period, because these are already broken up by period. For each period in which a 8 or better admin monarch has appeared, while not shielded by the 7 military, increase the relevant modifier by 1. But it's for that period specifically. That is how I would parse this. Could always go cross-reference it against the original rules text and see how it's phrased there. get a sense of it. Yeah, if they accumulated forever permanently, then you would kind of inevitably end up with nothing. Your throne would just shut down. You wouldn't bother ever. You would just take a crisis every turn. Forever. Assume permanent state of death and rebirth. Skeleton Sultanate. So our baseline reign length is pretty simple. It's just a flat, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's no gaps trying to sneak in there. I don't think there's much massaging of these numbers that is necessary. Don't need to knead or churn these numbers in order to try and extract some insights, at least from the baseline. I guess for a comparison from the baseline to the modified cases, still. So you get a crisis, 0.1 of the time. You get sickly, 0.1 of the time. You get baby, child, and teen, 0.1 of the time each. And you get standard adult, 0.7 of the time. There will be no home brewing at this time. No home brewing from this. This is just purely data extraction. Just doing some interpreting of the bones and entrails that are these tables. A lot of what comes out of here is its influence on your stats, and in turn goes into a much wider thinking space of how useful is your fresh Monarch right after you've minted them. Like, how long does the crisis or being a youth impact your ability to do other things? Which is a very large space. If you start getting into thinking about, okay, how much is this going to hinder my ability to, say, be building factories or conducting research? How strong is the sense of, I should shift the focus of what I'm doing on the board in response to the stats of my Monarch? Which does strongly seem to be a thing. From elsewhere, it can be seen and have been kind of felt in practice that if your ruler is just completely bad at a subject, it's probably not worth your money to chase it unless you have nothing else to do with the money. Or it is absolutely necessary that you try. Like, suddenly you need strong investments to do anything. Well, get on it, because that's your only option. Enjoy paying 10 times more, well, 5 times more than someone else who has a good leader. But on the other hand, to what extent is that really a problem? Is it that a bad leader is a millstone, or that a good leader is a boon, And how well can we measure that benefit or penalty in terms of cash? If not in terms of results, for that being like way too far down the pipeline to make any sense of the numbers. So, period 3, when we have this -1 on reign length. What does this do to the table? Not much. There's not going to be too much revelatory here. I mostly already said what the cases would be, just getting a chance to write it down. It provides supporting context for how often each of these states up here is going to happen. So with that, you get twice as often crisis in exchange for sickly, just doesn't happen anymore. Baby doesn't happen anymore. Teen and adult still happen. Adult is more likely. The no baby scenario. And you know, I would think that this could emerge as an X factor. That in exchange for having a lot of crises, which in turn inflict a lot of spinning the wheel over and over again, you're never being stuck with youth rulers. How much is avoiding children preferable to having to do more fights against yourself? Is court intrigue worth it? Maybe. So, period 4 and 7. When we have that -2, that gives us 30% chance of crisis, no sickly, no babies, no children. At least teen. Usually adult. And I suppose I could put on here that the expected age of our adult, the expected lifespan. Our baseline expected reign length is just flat out the average between our 13 and 3. Right in the middle there with a healthy 7.5. So usually, you're not looking past this point on the line anyway. With any given monarch. Up here is what you're thinking about. Baseline, half the time they live through their whole reign. Instability taking that down to quarter and 10th. For the average ruler. For how much the average ruler is a useful concept. Such can remain to be determined. Alright, so here where you've given up baby. For our possible reigns of 11, 10, 9, etc. So we are now looking at 6.6 average reign length. So on the whole, not that big a cost yet. And just to enter a note down when our peak modifiers to reign length are. Period 5 and 6. We have that -3. Don't need this block over here. So 40% of the time, crisis. None of the time, sickness, infants, or children. 90% of the time, an adult of some sort. Almost half the time, going to explode immediately. Death is certain. So on the -2 case, our new max age is 10. Or that teen ruler. And we're looking at an average reign length of 5.8. And then over here, 5.1. Just let that scoot up there. Rearrange our cells appropriately. So our overall political voltage here, from the baseline to deepest Ottoman modifiers. And I'll go ahead and format these into percents again. Just for the hell of it. Makes them a little more pleasant to look at. So we gain 30% chance of crisis, or right, these ones don't need to be percents. These are just numbers. That's just normal numbers. And I probably didn't need to really restate the column names, or the row names every time. Just gonna go with it for formatting. So, we gain 30% chance of crisis in exchange for never being sick, never being a baby, and never being a child. Your monarch will have at most 1 turn of penalized stats as a teen who is probably in a crisis, because every ruler is probably in a crisis. That'll have to be a comparison. -3 has no teen chance. Right, teen is gone. From -3, it is 100% adult. Always an adult. 40% of the time they are in a succession dispute with one of their surviving brothers. 40% of the time a brother has survived to begin the feud. To sustain the feud. Yes, I'll need to do a think about the trade-off between never ill and never child versus basically always in crisis. Always assume crisis. One of the approaches for strategizing around random events is to treat them as an actively malicious opponent that is always trying to choose the worst outcome for you and plan for those eventualities. Assume the worst and plan around the worst, and that way random numbers can only be good for you. Supposing you're in a situation where that reasoning holds together. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Alright, gonna step away for a second, and then we can proceed this think to our error table and our substitute for the error table that happens in crisis, because that's a part of this as well. This think has begun out of thinking about how long does it take to get rid of a bad, and it's going to travel over to what are the odds of escaping the instability modifiers in general, and the thing that the instability rules are in great part there to interact with. Over here in major rules. The army reform. That thing that is waiting for Turkey in the late game, where you must be at positive stability and either have a Mill 8 ruler or pass an ascended survival check, which on failure throws you into super crisis and costs 3 stability regardless. And then if you succeed, okay, you may now resume advancing through technology, you may take the Pashas out of play, and permanently lose 1 A+ from your base force for the rest of time. Such wonders are waiting down the road. Alright. So, succession. Monarch stats exist on a range of 3 to 9. And our cases for determining the stats are all the ones for your previous ruler. And crisis. The crisis table, well, the crisis line of text doing its thing. The crisis algorithm. And we will have some things to do about this. Since you can end up with a -1 on this from Death of an Heir. -2s from if you received the benefits of Excellent Ministers. Just kind of a snapback from that. There's a flat -1 from period 3 onward as part of the Turkish instability modifiers. And yeah, I think that's everything that will impact the heir table directly. Although in turn, Crisis overrides everything that is on here. Crisis removes dead heir. Crisis doesn't care about Excellent Ministers. Crisis is just over here doing its own thing. So you can count on every dynastic crisis to be the same. Pain is understood. The laws of the dome are absolute. Not a bad way of putting it. So let's get a measure of how many snakes fall out of the Sultan. So to start with, for the regular ones, we have 4 opportunities to end up with a 3, 3 to end up with a 4, then 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, 0, 0. Over on the 4, we have 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 0. Under you used to be a 5. Still the same chance of being the worst. Less chance of being a 4, more chance of being a 5. And then 1's the rest of the way down. So the change from 4 to 5 is one of your chances to get 4 becomes your chance to get 9. Over on 6, 0.2, 0.1, 2.2, 1, 0.1, 0.1. Over on your 7, 1, 1, 0, oddly enough, there's no 5 on the You Were Very Good table. And 3, 2, 2, 1. And then our crisis resolution, where 1, 2s, and 10s all reroll. So we convert the D10 into a D7. That is spanning these results. Yeah, D7. Notice that each of these is 1/7, or 14%-ish. So you actually have your best chance of getting 9s during a crisis. At the price of they will be 5s on the first turn after the crisis, when you are most likely to have the ruler snapped back out of your hands. But as long as they survive the crisis, they are more likely to be exceptional. Let me move over into this space over here, and I will use that to kind of worksheet out something. Yes, there's your expected value for a stat. If you came in at a 3, you're expecting 4.2. And then in turn, there you go. So there's your EVs on stats for each of our cases here. Your expected value overall on your best case error roll is better than Crisis. Right now, in the baseline where there's no modifiers on these dice. And you know that's about to change. Revealing powerful, embedded mathematical secrets in these rules. Dynastic Crisis good? Maybe. What if Thunderdome is in fact the ultimate tool to produce the ultimate Sultan? "300 years of constant civil war worth it to get that one Kwisatz Haderach." I'm gonna modify that for -1. Or I can also go ahead and migrate all of this down and expect it to hold up automatically as I modify this. So for each of these, I remove the result that's in the best cell and add it to the worst cell. Lose the possibility of a 7, an 8, and 3 9s. All the 9s, actually. and add 10 to each 3. And crisis remains the same. We'll just limit the digits on these. Cleanliness sake. So now, when you suppose that you already have a die modifier on, when your heir is in a permanent state of death, crisis is preferable to having a regular succession from a weak heir. Probably, usually, 1d10 is an extremely 1d anything is an extremely swingy, high variance state. So EV can only tell you so much. There are no expectations here. And so we can, proceed on down to our -2 case. We're talking about excellent minister penalty, well, counter benefit penalty, or more likely, your heir is dead and you are the Ottomans. Doing as you do. I don't think the -3 case is going to be particularly relevant here. It doesn't need to be worked out. Let's go ahead and add some little barriers here. And I can, like, gray out these sections that are just there for placeholding. That are there to be math. Intermediary steps that are not the decided values. Now I take all of these and make them even worse. So there's our -2 case, which is probably all of the height that needs to be devoted to this. And I could just go ahead and, alright, so there's our lime highlight. Then yellow. And then orange. So now, your best case regular succession, lives here in the 5s and low 6s. You drop an entire point. Nice. Although, the farther down your number was, the weaker the impact of these die penalties is. But all the while, crisis holds strong. Centered on that 666. The standard for all monarchs. Which, alright, so to bring us to our introductory point, now that we've assembled some tools, some tool numbers, our hammers and wrenches of statistic, inclined planes and pulleys. So suppose we are in newbie situation. We have a 333 bad, who is bad, and is expected to live another 9 turns. We know that half of the time that's going to be more like 6, which isn't much of a condolence on its own, unless you are willing to deliberately destabilize your country for a while, in which case that drops to an LD50 of, from an LD50 of like 6-7 turns to 3 turns. If you are willing to tank 3 turns of reduced stability, you are greatly boosting the chance of getting the bad out of your house. Yeah, lethal doses of time. The ultimate poison. Yeah, so even just tanking your stability on its own is a reasonably effective tool for cutting down life expectancy of monarchs, if we compare across these lines. That under clean conditions, nearly a third of the time, a monarch can live all the way to 12 turns. But just by accepting that 10% hit, 25% hit to revenue, isn't it? Just to be, yeah, because like neutral stability starts to hurt revenue. Let me go look at income. Get back over here. Yeah, neutral stability starts to hurt income. Because really your neutral stability is +1. You are slightly stable, rather than non-stable, which is a kind of unstable. If you are willing to take a quarter of your gross income, which depending on what country you are and what otherwise situation you're in, maybe you are, maybe you're fine with this. It's possible there are situations where you're okay with running way deep into the red for stability, based on the way that PvP wars work. That one of the things that like forces a PvP war to end is if you remain at -3 stability for like 3 turns in a row. Which suggests that in the late game, large countries will have enough treasury to throw around that they can afford to lose half of it and keep fighting tooth and nail. So maybe a quarter of your income for 3 turns isn't too much of a price to pay to just kind of encourage a bad ruler to fall down. Maybe. But then, when you do manage to expunge them, when you manage to oust them, just get them out of your house. You're still using baseline reign length for the successor. So 1/10 of the time, you slam a crisis and get a chance to maybe just completely jump out of mediocrity and ascend to greatness. Usurpers run the entire range evenly from bad to good, converging on 666 under all circumstances. Whereas you're bad with a normal successor who they raised with their bad parenting skills is going to be more like a 4s and 5s ruler. who in turn will produce other 4 and 5 rulers. Probably. Maybe. Probably. There is this extremely strong gravity well created by bad monarchs. I know if I were on a Google Sheet, I could use conditional formatting to just smartly flag all of these whatever I'd like. I'm not sure if OpenCalc has that. This little dent here, this inclusion, that's weird. One of the many oddities in the shape of these tables. Just why this bump here? Why these trenches? Were these arrived at by testing? Did Phil have a plan? A scheme? Or did things just sort of happen all by their own? Like there, with the color coding in place. Now that you've taken the highlighter to the information, what we have here is soup. Like this little ridge running down the middle of boosted odds. Kind of running up the diagonal. If you are a 3, you're probably 3. Well, you're probably better than 3. But of any one result, 3 is more likely than the others. From a 4, 70% chance of improving. Actually, yeah, that's probably a more useful number to cut out from between these. Your odds of improving or worsening, or remaining the same on each column. All right, now let's go ahead and crunch some columns down. Compress. We know what's in these cells. No need to worry about that. I could unpack some of these onto different pages later. All right, and for the crisis part of this, also all these need to move over one. For the crisis part of this, whether you get worse or better is proportional to how good you already were, because it's that flat line. So you cannot get worse from a 3. You are always at least a 3. 0.4, stay the same, and so you 0.6 get better. And 0.3, 0.2, and 0.5. 0.4, 0.2, and 0.4. Five, 2, 3. Yeah, because 6 is here. At that 20. Yeah, so it is at 5 where you have this break-even point where you could go either way. And then at 6 that you're more likely to... You're equally likely to backslide versus hold position. Same or better is equal to worse here. Yeah, so 9 at 8 are your improve. There's 7 for your stay the same. So it's actually still the case here at 7 as well. Well, at exactly 7. Let me include the space for 8 and 9, and then crisis. Where, simply enough, those are both just shift down 1. So 0.2 for same, 0.1 for better, and the remaining 0.7 for worse. 0.1 for same, you can't get better, and 0.9 for worse. Yeah, so then in a crisis you have the flat 1 out of 7, chance of staying the same. You have stat -1 times 14. Yeah, so I could just write this in as a literal, I guess. That's your chance of rolling under. And then 9 minus x out of 7 of getting better. Crisis is a land of contrast. At baseline. So now with all of this in mind, let's look at the worst cases. For most of these, yeah, the center of the table all kind of holds the same under these modifiers. Here it is that worse steals 10% from better. But the odds of same hold as they are. Yeah, so 5 becomes our break-even point. And 6 becomes hell. Crunch all these columns together. Make them a little easier to look at. So, 8, you can no longer get better. Joining 9, which experiences no, it experiences the change of you can't even break even. You will be worse. So, an Ottoman Sultan, starting in period 3, can only have a 9 in a skill as a result of a crisis. And their heir will decay, unless they are in turn usurped. And for the good times in -2. Your break-even point is now 4. Enjoy having a ruler with 4 forever. Just 4s. Your 7 can still jump to an 8, barely. Or continue to exist as a 7. And 8 is a fleeting memory. 8 is a dream. The madness of a forgotten era. Stats as good as 8. Impossible. Unthinkable. So under normal circumstances, one who has received bad will, 60% of the time, for each stat, improve that stat to slightly less bad. Though not by much. Six and 7. Really? Are they both equally likely to... Yeah, 20 for yourself and then 30 left above. Alright, so a 6 and a 7, under normal circumstances, both have equal odds of holding steady. Coin flip to decay, otherwise you're fine. And it is 8s and 9s that are guaranteed to fall apart. Yeah, that breakdown, that lines up well with the implications of the expected values. 3, 4, 5, and 6 tend to improve. 6 and 7 tend to stagnate. 8 and 9 tend to decline at baseline. But then, with even the -1 modifier, 3 and 4 improve, 5 stagnates, 6 plus decline. And with the -1, you may not advance. You stagnate at 4, and your blood is replaced with snakes at 5 plus. Crisis, though. Crisis is fair. Crisis is perfectly balanced. The principle of equilibrium of violence. Crisis will produce only Crab Monarch. So the comparison between Peak Thunderdome and the baseline for a succession. Which is better at escaping from the bottom? Would be something to kind of quickly sketch out, try to interpret from the values that I've cast down here. Conduct an experiment. So under baseline, your bad is probably living for 7 years. Well, 7 turns. More like 3 or 4 if you're willing to sabotage them. When you're in Ascended Crisis, there's less benefit to destabilizing to try and reduce life expectancy of a ruler. You're kind of already in there as good as you get. Not nearly as much shifting of odds. Let's just think purely in terms of the succession. Your best case, your average case, and your worst case. What they are and what their odds of happening are. So your worst case, naturally, is you receive another 3/3/3. Which OpenCalc will interpret that as me trying to write down a date, if I do it that way. With hyphens or with slashes. Or with dots. There we go. Just make it a literal string. Give myself a little gap to potentially work in. Worst case, you're stuck with a 3/3/3. Who could also be a 3/3/3 baby if we want to go even further beyond. So 40% chance of non-improvement. But we're supposing no stats improve at all. So we cube that. So the worst will only happen 6.4% of the time. The chance of having just the worst. Nothing at all. Our best case scenario is the similarly unlikely you max out every one of your rolls and grab yourself a 7/7/7. You will then, maybe have some capacity to retain those stats across future generations. That's your high water. And it's an equally likely... Well, no, it's less likely because it's 0.1 cubed. It's 0.1%. that you achieve the best from the worst. Your most prodigal son. So our expected values, we'll consider 4s and 5s, any combination of 4s and 5s. Is our average outcome that we'll speak of. Slightly bigging up that column. So our chances of mediocrity from 3 is once again 0.4 cubed. Getting trapped entirely in the mediocre and uninteresting. The chance that there are no 6s and no 7s. Is the same as our odds here. Well, hold on, it went tried to extrapolate from that, it tried to subtract 1. That's not a terribly useful look at this. We're dealing with a 3-dimensional space, so there's a big, hefty cube of possible outcomes that this actually extends up into when we're considering all 3 stats for a given spread. Because at this moment, we've only accounted for 12, for not even 13% of all outcomes. By considering the worst, the best, and the everything in between. Alright, I think a more useful number to think for is, no stat better than a 5. Yeah, so that's, you fail to achieve a 6 or 7 on all 3 rolls. 0.8 cubed. That happens half the time. Specifically 51.2. So consequently out of that, worst will get promoted up here to top billing, because that's what we're all about. And I will subtract the odds of having the worst ruler out from here. We're gradually partitioning up the space into cases that at least I think are interesting at the moment. At my current level of Swamp Long and Sunday afternoon lazy math. I could think about sum of stats if I wanted to, if I did want to fold this down into one direction. Swamp Long exaggerates my current state. I just have seasonal congestions that occur inevitably, regardless of circumstance. It's more Swamp Skull than Swamp Lung. Yeah, so we've now covered half of the possibility space. So half of the time, you will have someone with at least a 6, at least 1 6 in something, is what we pull out of this. And having a 6 in one stat means there's at least one category of stuff you can go be effective at with this ruler. And we know that 6 is reasonably capable of retaining its value for a while. Let's think about Crisis. In terms of these same categories. Yeah, so consequently, 1 minus the sum of all of those. "48% of the time, half of the time, almost, you will have a 6 or 7 doing a normal succession from a bad ruler. 1 or more good stats, half the time. So over to regular Crisis. Which, right, all crises the same. Worst case scenario for the Crisis of getting a 3/3/3. Yeah, we'll consider the same cases. Except now your best case from the Crisis is all 9s. And the odds of that happening is 1/7 cubed. You are as likely to get the best as the worst out of a usurper. So in both cases, so go ahead and slap the formatting on there. 0.29%. A usurper won't be the worst. Although on their first turn, with their halved stats, they might still effectively be the worst. A 6/6/6 usurper spends their shakedown period as the worst and then ascends to mediocrity, to adequacy. So your odds of everything being 6 or worse, 3, 4, 5. Your 3/7 cubed. Keep reaching for the calculator I have on the desk that I use for off-the-cuff numbering. When I am looking at calculator in grid form, I don't need to manually crunch any of these numbers. Just present them. only 7% of the time will you have a bad usurper, a bad or subpar usurper. So in turn, by contrast, in a crisis, 90% of the time, you have your usurper show up and be good at least one thing. So before accounting for the stability cost of crisis and the high odds of crisis plunging right back into another succession, and so forth, the X factors that happen back up on this layer, just going by the stats, going from one ruler to the next, when you have bad, a dynastic crisis and a usurpation is vastly preferable to a peaceful succession. Your usurper will be stronger than whatever garbage progeny fell out of King Bad the First. So this is the balancing factor that is built into when Automania goes full Thunderdome. When the reign length table puts itself over into the red line, each of these crises, while expensive, is an opportunity to produce the one good sultan that I need to get some reforms done. Actually, snakes are good for the economy. Alright, so I think a further consideration then, which is reasonably flat to do here, and also just kind of trivial because of the specific case I'm looking for. Well, military 7 or better. Alright, so I need to take this and extend it out to write those. So this is a trivial case. So that was our baseline. Let me copy this over and your heir is dead, or you have the flat -1 penalty to heir stats. So what this means now is that .5 cubed of the time you remain the worst. You have now 12% odds of becoming the worst. Your best case scenario is now 6s because you can't get a 7 in this state. And it is still 0.1%. That is still perfect result on all of your dice. Your chance of overall trash man with nothing better than a 5 now becomes yeah, 0.9 cubed minus your chance of bad. 60% of the time, you get general purpose trash ruler. Yeah, you want chance time. You want to go for chance time, because yeah, there's no longer any 7s living in here. Your chance of having a 6 or better, 27%. The bad heir The bad air modifier is very strong. The dynastic miasma. So what becomes unfortunate then is I don't have ways to try and provoke a crisis. You have a lever that you can pull to try and reduce your regular life expectancy and roll monarchs more often, of running your stability in the red. Which is expensive, but it is there as a lever, as a dial you can actuate. You have no active options that you can take to try and push the rain table deeper into the red. You have only your odds on the page. Although, hold on, if I just pop back over to the military reforms. Your survival check here from when you fail military reform that slaps you with a -3 on your characteristic dice for your heir. Good times. So trying to turn your monarch into a general and get them killed that way, that has great difficulty succeeding. So, okay, you roll up your stats. A monarch gets captured if their unit is defeated but they survive. If their unit is destroyed but they survive. They can die in combat per the normal way that you die in combat. You immediately pay stability. If they get captured, that's a 200 ducat ransom that is mandatory and will bankrupt you if you are unable to pay the 200 ducat ransom. This giant emergency fund you need to keep on hand if you're sending your monarch into battle. And to remind, just to pop back over into battles. The chance of your leader being injured. Baseline, just 10%. And then half of the time they are injured, they are dead. So 5% chance per battle of a leader being killed. 10% extra chance, well, so in turn, 5% extra chance to death if they were an especially good general. In which case you probably weren't trying to send them to die anyway. They can't become that good a general without having had a good military score in the first place. Like, actually, they can't have a 6. Unless they had a 9 in military. Off the top. So no, you're never going to have that modifier come up in trying to get your leader killed. Unless for some reason you have an amazing war leader, but need to throw him in the bin because you'd rather have a diplomat for some reason, enough to risk all of this. No, we're assuming if you're trying to throw your general, your monarch, in a pit by making them a general, that they are that they are the worst. They are at best a 2 in combat on any stat. So instead, it's the plus 5% chance for broken morale, and then the big risk, the big money, the whammy. If all of your units were defeated, if your side was eliminated, this -5 on the check for injury. At that point, you're looking at a 35% chance of your ruler dying. Because you're at -6 on the die. So 70% of the time you get wounded, half of that you get killed. And if you don't get killed, you are instead captured and ransomed because you had your unit wiped out. So if the king is still alive after that battle, they're getting caught. So trying to get a leader killed in a fight so that you can bin them. Just to think about that for a moment. We'll just quickly extrude another column of that, so 5% chance of dying in a generic fight. So flip that around, 95% chance. Of surviving a fight under normal circumstances. To the power of how many fights you put them into. Keeping in mind that because of the number of combat rounds that exist in a turn, you can only count on, at absolute most, maybe being able to throw them into 10 fights. When getting 10 combat rounds in a turn is already very unlikely. Chose the wrong format for those, I think. Or what, is the column too small now? There we go. So, chances of a leader getting killed in combat, unless you have them fail completely at a fight, takes a long time to creep up on them and actually take them out. Half the time, a very active combat leader, can make it through like 14 fights. A fort fight, as it were known. Yeah, trying to weaponize a bad ruler to dispose of them doesn't work out well. Unless you want to rattle the bones on getting them killed in a big rout where all of their troops are eliminated. Which is also difficult to do because they have to lead your biggest unit. So you would need to have a tiny overall army as well in order to set up a situation where your king is on a unit that is going to get stack wiped. You would be demobilizing yourself completely in order to try and get those bigger odds. Which, again, so that 35 baseline, if we iterated that out to how many... Alright, that doesn't take long to ramp up. You know, 2 complete destructions of all the forces under their command. Where, keep in mind, if they fail to die in such a battle, they have been captured and are off the field for the rest of the turn and cost you $200 to get back. And you cannot decline that. So the other way to get a Monarch killed, if you're trying to cycle out a bad Monarch, is execution. Which is extremely expensive, having revolts succeed at deposing your Monarch. Which requires half of your country to be overrun by rebels. So we've seen that's very difficult to have happen. You have to really go out of your way to get half your country absorbed by rebellion. Even if you were deliberately trying to tank the country, it would take ages to reach that state. In which case, you get a crisis leader, you get a usurper, at the cost of half of your treasury, a point of domestic trade index, three random commercial fleets, and 4 stability. There is no situation where this bill of materials would be worth you would never deliberately collapse your government in the board game. All of this is more than you would get back by taking one swing at the table. And setting that up deliberately would take more than the life expectancy of your bad ruler. Kinda guaranteed. Yeah, on the way to trying to collapse your country, you could just do a regular redlining of your stability to cut life expectancy in half. Which is about what this +1 on survival is worth in the long term. In the immediate term, tiny, but when looking at how far out the curve extends, that's about how much you squeeze it. Yes, we can put this away. These aren't... Those numbers were helpful in that they showed this was not a viable thing to consider. I suppose a remaining topic that could be touched on inside this whole cloud of things is, the economy, naturally. Excellent ministers. Our good friend this event. where essentially what you do is generate a better usurper. That's what your skilled bureaucrats are. Peaceful usurpation. Yes, let me just take one of these tables down here. Talk about bureaucracy. Where we don't need a crisis column. And instead, what we want to think about is, suppose your current leader's stat is this. Let us perform the minister's event and see what their odds of improvement are and by how much. Whereas the outcome for excellent ministers, which I can just kind of write over here, is everything from 3 to 9 is base value. So you get 10% chance of rolling 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on their faces. Then 1s become 7s, 2s become 8s, and 10s become 9s. There you go. That is the curve that you get for excellent minister. And then you choose the better of your previous stat and the stats of your minister. So, previous stat, result after ministers. What are the odds? So if you already had a 3, the worst case scenario of remaining at 3 because your minister is also bad is that flat 0.1. And there's the rest. And this is one of those two-dimensional tables where we get to take a nice, clean, diagonal line. Because with ministers, you can't get worse. All the worst results for ministers get absorbed into breaking even. This becomes 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5... No, 0.6 here, because we're absorbing that 20% chance of a 7. 0.8, and 1. 1 in that it's 100. If you're already a 9, you stay a 9 naturally. That's the trivial result. This is what excellent ministers will do to you. The worse off you are, the more you stand to gain from excellent ministers. Yeah, just gonna spread out. Our friends here, get ourselves a nice fan of weighted values. Right, these need to have slid down as well. Hold on. Do a quick fixing of that. All of those were unfairly being pointed at the 3. That was not giving proper weighted results. So, expected values of exceptional ministers. The EMEV 43D3. You will probably go from a bad to a 6.7. And then our arc upward here is 6.7, 6.9. Nice. Nice. 7.2, 7.6, 8.2. Open up another space here. Talk about this in terms of gain. Ministers are at their best when you are at your worst. They're going to give you 3 points. Probably. They can't make bad any worse. And it is 0.1% chance of rolling a 3/3/3 minister on top of your 3/3/3 at Monarch. So once again, ministers cause things to converge around. Ministers converge higher than just successions. Ministers converge in the 6 to 7 area. The value drops off strongly if you already have a 7. Which then calls into questions. On the big ref, I have a count of how often each of the events shows up on that table, which then translates directly into a percentage because it's 100 cells of equal value, equal evil value. So, in descending order, the most likely of those. At 5% each, fiscal evasion, technological advance, and exceptional year. At 4%, agricultural crisis. Down at 3%, excellent ministers. Other 3% events are looting and insecurity, corruption, military leader, sale of honorary titles, epidemic, poor weather, and deflation. 2% events are naval losses, discovery of mines, wave of obscurantism, pirates, development of warships, drought, rush of colonists, refugees, scandal, plots, defection of ally, enthusiasm for the army, renewal of popularity, enthusiasm for the navy, agricultural technique development, conquistador, explorer, governor, diplomatic preeminence, and cultural expansion. And then the rare events, all the 1% events that only have a single cell on that entire table. Crisis of madness, serious sickness, gift to the state, death of an heir, depletion of a mine, new ally, desertions, death of a leader, dynastic inheritance, offer of marriage, offer of alliance, independence of a vassal, reorganization of army or fleet, economic crisis, economic boom, rectification, and treachery. So the fact that certain players in the Grand Campaign have experienced the double madness over the course of the campaign. We live in interesting times. And the odds of any one economy event actually occurring to you, to your benefit, are quite low. So it's not worth it to try to wait into the thinking, the chance of an excellent minister showing up and fixing your bad ruler. Not particularly worth it. So the wild card chance of thing happening then is if the economy decides to save you. So your bad, who we're already supposing has a 6 to 7 year life expectancy. So on every turn that the bad is in place. Ministers is also worth a year for considering what that -2 on your heirs is worth versus how much you gain from your ministers. Do these roughly balance out, and in what situations does that hold or not? Yeah, so your odds of having your economic events over the course of your 6th turn, let's say, ruler, is 1 minus the chance that all 6 of these turns were some other non-excellent minister event, which is 97 for each. its ministers is a 3% event. So actually, over a large span of time, once you're thinking bigger picture, getting excellent ministers at least once over the span of 6 turns isn't impossible. Let's take that a step further. Just for some very biggest picture, probably to the point of being useless, but let's just do it anyway. Over the course of the entire grand campaign, the odds that you will see excellent ministers at least once, 84%. Excellent ministers or any of the other 3%ers. Your 3 out of 5s. %60 for over half the campaign. Actually, maybe retract that earlier statement. The chance of the bureaucracy swooping in to fix everything where dynastic inheritance has failed, not unconsiderable. The longer your bad is in charge, the more chance that somebody shows up to hold an office better than they could. To hold an office at all, in which case, as determined down here, getting excellent ministers means you've probably received your 6 in something, which I am arbitrarily maintaining is a threshold for a usable leader. A 6 in admin, you can succeed at improvements. A 6 in diplomacy, you can push negotiations forward. A 6 in military, you have reasonable chance of doing research. The economy. Just nudge that over here. Though, of course, the later in the reign of a bad that your ministers show up, the less impact they get to have, since the whole administration gets swept out when the succession occurs. So what has been learned? What wisdom fell out of the numbers? 1. Real life expectancy at a baseline is maybe half. Half your upper limit. At any given time, half of the time, you make it half of the way to the death line. And that in turn crunches its way up. To complete their reign, a monarch must first survive from the current day to halfway between the present day and the moment of their death. They must then survive for half of the remaining distance between that time and the moment of their death. And in turn again and again. Thus, all kings are immortal. This we know from the crown. Unless, you live in the spice zone. No laws. When you go in for the Sultan fight. which having this next to the neutral column kind of throws it off. This column needs to be compared to that one, where the 60% chance of making it one turn from a crisis is gone, and it's immediate coin flip, and then worse, as you ascend to the highest levels of dynastic crisis. So the Ottoman late game is a constant revolving door of usurpers, until one of them is strong enough to hold the government together for a normal span of time, which might last all of one generation before falling back into chaos. Since they're like, okay, if they have a 7 or better military, they avoid the instability penalties and get to proceed as normal, which means you have a ruler with military 7 or better, hoping that their heir has military 7 or better, which we see from here is a coin flip. No, is worse than a coin flip because you have that permanent -1 unless that is part of... Let's look at wording here. Okay, yeah, the exception for being a good military ruler is up here at the top level. So this characteristic modifier also is inside of that. This only applies if you did not have a good fighter. So a good fighter gets to ignore all of that and try to have an heir as good at fighting as they can. An heir adept at self-defense. Which coin flip as to whether you get to continue running a normal family for a while, or descend back into the blender. At least when you're inside the blender, you're also less likely to hit the problem with the, if you were good at admin, things get worse for everyone. Because reasons. Yeah, so revolving door that leads directly into a meat grinder until someone manages to step aside and then flips coins to stay out of there or fall back in. Interesting times. However, when you're then thinking about the general case, if you're trying to get out of a pit of having the worst leader, you want a usurper. You want to see a usurper. You have no control over whether or not you see a usurper, but you're hoping for it. You wish for it. The dynasty has clearly failed. You need fresh arms. You just gotta go in there and shake things up. When you already have the worst leader, a usurper can't be worse. And excellent ministers are just always good to see. Unless you already don't need them, they are a big help. So there is some intense gravity going on with the bad corner of this table, but also some weird wiggly bits to it, and some release valves that can launch you back out of the pit. There's a lot of potential nuance in how all these gears fit together. But not much player control over how they turn. strange, but not beyond understanding. The usual. So the natural follow-up companion piece to thinking about Monarch stats and how long they stick around and how drastically they move between generations is to then put more of a think into what are these numbers actually worth for you over on the other end of the system, and how much can you compensate for bad ruler with good economy, with playing effectively with the rest of the things you have much more control over in order to force things through. How much can Bad King really weigh you down versus Super King? Ruler stats do various things, mostly add to the dice during certain rolls. Add to the dice or column shift during administrative actions, since that is the weirdness that admin does. Alright. Been a productive think session. And this is the kind of stuff I've been doing between Euro campaign sessions, sometimes on a whim. After a mechanic comes into focus during play, I'll just kind of get it up on the table and split it open and take a look at all the tubes and wires and try to get a sense for how it should behave and what actual power the player has over it. Was there a design intent going into this from Phil in 1993? And if so, how well did he realize it? Usually leaving with more questions than answers, but the good kind. Larger, stronger questions. These, the mysteries. And this is a concept that I've had kinda on the shelf ready to go for any week where someone isn't able to show up for a grand campaign session. Instead, there will be a round of this. Possibly with the other players around to just kinda relax and talk while performing the dissection of the numbers. Think about what even is this thing we're playing. After these couple of months, does anyone really understand what we've done? Maybe? Maybe. Or maybe. Games in general, I would continue to say would be improved by replacing random elements with deterministic elements. You can make deterministic elements that are still difficult to control or force concerns and questions on them. The middle ground between those two would be if you have normalized random elements. The fact that the core engine that's driving most of this is 1d10, that's a very flat space. That's a very high variance thing. It produces the strong jank. And that seems like as good a point as any to go ahead and wind down. That has been a wave of think about the Monarch section. Monarch phase and what it means to go through these checks and consult these tables and be threatened by these modifiers. I already have partial thinking sheets that I've put together around a bunch of other sections. And those will probably be the subject of future sit-downs. In which to thunk. Economy events don't have much to... I kind of already just spoken word. Spread out what's known about them. It is a table and it does as tables do. Next subject that I would probably consider, though, is the political event table and its brand of interesting, weird jank texture caused by how these cells are distributed out versus what numbers are put into them each period, and what happens when you start depleting cells on a table and how that pushes all the numbers around. Like, you can consider, so period 1 table here has event 1 in its first 4 cells, which was Treaty of Tordesillas, and we did see it try to come up very often until it was resolved. But then at the same time, event 1 period 3, the revolt of the Dutch United Provinces, is spread out differently, and like conspicuously differently, when this is also supposed to be an event that's very likely to happen, and an event that you make more likely to happen based on actions. Based on having a minus to a die that's building up to a degree. So trying to dissect what effect that will have, if any. What does it mean? How likely are these events really? Off the raw table, and then get a sense of how they pass odds off to each other as they advance. Because the event table's real weird. But another, I think, good weird. Does a good job of creating jumbled, irregular results that still kind of converge on things. I want to get this under the knife. Get out the lamps and the magnifiers. Get a good deep electron scan on all these cells. Another time. Good numbers.